Hi everybody, it's Sarah Cray with Let's Make Art, and I teach watercolor and sometimes gouache, and today we're doing a gouache tutorial of a kingfisher bird. It is super vibrant and fun, and I really love painting birds. The feathers, they're just a good time, I think.
I like them a lot too.
Great.
I didn't know kingfisher was a bird.
It is.
Thank you for teaching me.
Okay, so we have an outline with this project, so have that ready with your graphite paper. We are going to be doing this project in 7-ish steps, which I know sounds like a lot, but it's just a lot of layering. So our very first step, we are going to do kind of an initial layer of the bird, kind of watering down our gouache and having transparent layers. Our second step, we are going to put in this piece of wood that the bird is standing on. Our third step, we are going to start defining our feathers on our body and our head. Our fourth step, we're going to do our beak and our eyes. Our fifth step, we're going to do our chest, kind of the yellow and orange area, so we have the chest and around the eye. Our sixth step, we're going to be doing shadows on the feathers and highlights. And then our very last step is just overall detail, making sure there's no other places that need our attention, that kind of stuff. So I always love to leave that last step a little bit vague because you know what your painting needs. So you can decide that for you. We're using five colors. We're using 5 colors for this project.
5, 6, 3.
3, it's 5. The white paint that's not actually on there threw me off, that's why. Okay, so our very first color is carmine. Our second color is turquoise blue. Our third color is permanent yellow deep. Our fourth color is ivory black, and that last color is permanent white. You probably can't see it on the white paper, but it is there. We're gonna do our outline, and then we will do our oath. So, I got my graphite paper here. I'm going to tape my outline to my paper, do dark, shiny side down. Remember, graphite paper gets better over time, so please don't use it just once and then throw it away. It just gets better. And then start tracing. Now, because gouache is opaque, it's like watercolor's opaque sister. It's not as imperative to make sure that your lines are as light as possible because we will be painting over a lot of this. Also, I want to point out that I use these hash marks to communicate shadows. You do not have to trace those in. It's more like a reference that you guys can look at while we're painting, so you know, like, okay, that's where a shadow should be. That's my hope with them anyway.
I think they're helpful.
I hope so. Because before I would just do like solid lines, and I think it would sometimes get confusing on like what part is the edge of an object and what part is like the shadow on the object, you know? So that's why I tried to switch it up a bit. Also, I hope that the more you guys create and paint with me and paint on your own, the easier it will be for you to discern darker values and lighter values. So it's kind of like the more you paint and draw and even just like look at stuff, the better practice it is for you to figure out where there are lowlights, where there are highlights, how you communicate form, all of that fun stuff.
I don't draw very often or actually practice, but watching the tutorials and helping film them, just being here, listening, I've noticed more shapes in more things. People's faces, there are shapes, like oval, circle.
Yeah, Keenan and Brock didn't believe. Do you remember when I said about the eyeballs? And you're like, no way. But it's true, you learn it in drawing class, which is your eyeballs are in the middle of your head.
Oh,
They're not at the top of your head. They're in the middle of your head.
Yes.
Which it is so hard for our brain to like do that. That Brock even took a ruler and measured people's eyes and their heads to
like
see if they
3 or
were
4
actually
people
in the middle. So it's just things like that that you just kind of, you basically just learn not to really trust your brain anymore.
If you don't know who Brock is, if you're new enough, Brock is one in charge-ish. In charge at Let's Make Art. But he was also in a lot of the early on tutorials with Sarah.
Yeah, he did a lot of filming before Keenan was part of our team.
Yep.
And he also has covered for me a couple of times when we used to do live paint-alongs.
Right.
One time, like, I had bronchitis, and so he taught the class for me, even though he has no art background, and he did an amazing job.
He did a great job.
It was a lot of fun. So you guys might know who he is. Okay, I'm just checking to make sure I got all of my lines because I'm using a black pen, which is sometimes not helpful when you're tracing. All right, here we go. We got my outline. Okay, so let's do our oath. If you can raise your right hand and repeat after me. I promise to be kind to myself.
I promise to be kind to myself.
I promise not to compare my work.
I promise not to compare my work.
And I promise to have fun.
And I promise to have fun.
And I really like to start off that way because when you're painting, especially when you're doing anything new, it's always a compare game, right? Because we think that if we're bad at something, we're bad. Or, you know what I mean? Like, and I just want to say, art is not about that. Art is a learned skill that you improve over time. It's not, for the most part, it's not just like a gift that you're born with. There are some people that are like that. That does exist. It's rare though. For everyone else, it's putting in time. That's all it is. Yep. So if this is something that you want to do, do it. If this is something that you want to do just because it's fun to put paint on paper and it's not about making something perfect, you're in the right spot. That's what we're about too.
That's me.
That's Keenan.
I just like to throw paper and paint around.
Who doesn't?
I don't know.
Have a great time with it.
It is such a blast.
I have my round 6 and round 2 brushes. These are the Let's Make Art Classic series. Round 6 and round 2 is pretty much what we use for every tutorial. So if you don't have those brushes and you want to paint with us, I would suggest getting those. Okay, let's do step 1, and that's we're going to do our initial layering of colors on our bird. So I'm going to take this turquoise blue and pull it out, and I am going to add a little bit of water to this. I'm going to water it down to make it nice and transparent. And I'm going to start painting my feathers. So I'm going to start kind of like mimicking the shapes and the edges here, and then just using some water to blend it out. So again, we're utilizing this a little bit more like watercolor, where we're relying on the water to create lighter values and to fill up our space. Now remember, this is our initial wash, so don't stress out if you're feeling like, you know, something got away from you or you got some hard edges. That's okay. And even though I could like just do a blue wash across the entire body, I want to start making the feathers feel dimensional as soon as I can. And so that's why I'm kind of following the shapes of these feathers, going off the edges, and then kind of using water to blend up and around it, because I want to start defining these different planes, because the earlier you do that, the better. The easier it is for you later on. And we are using gouache. If you're not familiar with gouache, I have an intro to gouache on our beginner series that you guys are free to refer to if you need a little bit more background information on what gouache is, how it works with watercolor, how it compares, all of that stuff. So it's honestly a really fun, versatile medium that gives you more freedom than I think both watercolor and acrylic sometimes. So I hope you guys like it, because it's been really fun to work with.
I enjoy it just in theory, and I haven't even tried it yet.
Yeah, I feel like it takes away the fear of doing either acrylic or watercolor because, you know, it's opaque, so you can layer it like you can with acrylic, and you can reconstitute it. So if like blending or things like that are an issue, and like acrylic, it's difficult to do that, you can reconstitute it kind of like how easily watercolor blends out. It's really fabulous. Okay, I got my blues, and I'm gonna also put in my, like, the chest area, which is yellow. Maybe put a little bit of that carmine in there to give it kind of an orange feel. We're gonna do the chest and the neck and the belly. Putting that in and then just using water to blend it out. We also have a hint of yellow here and behind the eye. Again, first layer, so it's really, we're kind of just defining where the color spaces are. We're kind of using this more as an underpainting. And I have a blue chunk right in the middle of that cheek.
Can you describe an underpainting?
So an underpainting is, it's kind of like when you go out to dinner and you order an appetizer.
Oh,
okay?
I can relate to that.
Okay?
Okay.
So it kind of like gives you a little something extra, and it prepares you for your meal and all of that stuff. So this, you use an underpainting to define your lights and darks and your colors. You can do it in multiple ways by doing like light washes of where you want to put color, kind of like what we did here. Or another way to do an underpainting is to do an all over wash of one color, and that sets a color temperature tone. So if you want an all over feeling of blue, sometimes you'll do an underpainting of blue if you want the landscape to feel cool. Or if you want to, you know what I mean? You can kind of communicate different temperatures and different things with the underpainting and build on it. It also is nice because, like, going into this, now I know where my blue areas are and my orange and yellow areas are. And that's because I just defined them in that first layer in this underpainting. So. Okay, so we're gonna let that dry, and we're gonna move on to doing our stick thing, branch. We're gonna make brown. So brown is pretty much dark orange. So I'm gonna grab some yellow, some carmine, and a little bit of black. Okay, so now I have a really dark brown. And I like to mix a couple of browns when I'm gonna paint browns because I like variation. So I have this brown, and then this I can kind of mix in there to give, now I have a range. You see, I have like 3 different to choose from. And then if you really want, if you like the really kind of dark, shadowy, desaturated browns, you can even add a little extra black on this edge over here.
I like that, the middle one between the, I don't know what brown color that is.
This one here?
Yes.
Yeah, that's a good one. So like, usually when I'm doing browns, I'll mix a color and then pull from it and do a variation in colors and tones. So then I have those that I can pull from. Okay, so we're gonna start by putting in, I'm gonna kind of go in between these two, and I'm gonna do a layer on the left-hand side of this branch. And I'm gonna utilize water on this. It is gonna have a transparent feel. Okay, and then I always love to introduce undertones of other colors for like warmth or just to like really push it. So I'm gonna grab this more orange that I have here, and introduce that into some parts of this wood. And for me, I feel like it just creates depth. If you want to do maybe more of a yellow instead of the orange, do more of a yellow. This is your painting. You have the right to take what I say and totally ignore it. You can do that. I won't be mad. Okay, and then this part that's sticking out here, this is also going to be a lighter value. So I'm going to just use that same color. Now this is where it gets a little bit tricky, and this is a three-dimensional object, so we're seeing one side of it, this middle part is another side, and then this part is like a third element to it. They're all on different planes. So how we communicate that, instead of just doing one flat brown color, is we switch up the values and sometimes even the hue to communicate that they're different planes. So I did kind of a lighter brown on here, and then when I go to the center, I'm calling this part the center, I'm going to use that darker brown that I mixed, because the bird is like on top of this part right here, so it would be a little bit darker. We also have that foot, so I'm going to paint around it. Okay, and then I'm going to use water to blend out that brown. If you accidentally get the brown into your feathers, it's not a big deal. We're going to do another layer over our feathers anyway, and gouache is opaque, so it shouldn't have a huge effect. And then this side is also going to have that kind of edge separating from this part here. And if you want to drop in other browns, a little bit of orange here and there or something like that, please do so. And then this area is like kind of sticking out, this roundish part. So I'm just going to kind of like define that edge and then just push it up by putting this shadow in. Okay.
I like those brown colors.
Yeah, aren't they good? I'll go back in and do a little bit more texture lines, but for now I just wanted to like put it in there and define it a little bit and not think too hard. I don't want to think too hard about this part because I really want my bird to stand out, but I don't want it to feel totally flat. So we'll go back in near the end and kind of, I'm doing it right now, but doing these like texture lines on the wood. Okay. Okay, now we're going to move on to step 3, which is the feathers. We're going to start defining a little bit more. So I'm still using my 6. If you feel more comfortable using your 2, you're welcome to, but I would suggest your 6. And I'm going to take this turquoise color, and I'm going to go over these feather edges again. Now, Kingfishers are very vibrant in their colors, that blue and orange. If you want to add a tiny, tiny bit of yellow to your balloon to kind of give a turquoisey color, you can. I always like to do that. It's up to you.
I like a turquoise color.
Yeah, isn't it nice?
Turquoise was my favorite color when I was a kid.
Really?
Yeah.
So I'm kind of just following the edges here of this bird on this first layer of feathers. And then after I put that in, I'm going to blend out. So I'm still utilizing the water, not as much as I was with that first layer. Okay. And I'm just going to repeat that for these different layers of feathers here. So I'm going to go along this edge, start putting these feather edges in here, kind of where they're layered, like so. And then kind of blend out from there. I'm kind of using water, but it's not, it's less water than our first one, so it's doing a more opaque layer. And then we have this guy here. And then just blend it. And if you feel like there's like a feather like layer missing and you want to like add one in there, that's fine. I always view outlines as just general information for you guys. So I never get offended if you kind of like decide to make it your own, add more, or maybe I didn't put a line in there somewhere. So like, I never want outlines to be a stressor for you. I just want them to be a guide and a starting point. So give yourself that freedom to try something different or to not follow the outline totally. Because even though it's scary to do, you learn the most when you just go for something on your own. That's when you get real information. Okay, and then I'm going to do to the top of the head. Now the top of the head is highlighted. Okay, that's how we show that there is form, is by changing up the values. So it's a little bit darker here where it meets the beak. And you can either make it a lighter value by adding a little bit of water. What I did to make sure it feels nice and light is I mixed a little bit of white paint in with my blue, which I did not have on my palette, so I'm putting some on my palette right now. Mixing that turquoise blue in with the white. There we go, there's our highlight.
Ooh, that looks nice. I don't know anything about kingfishers.
Me neither. Me neither. Okay, and then I'm transitioning back to more of just that turquoise blue color, maybe a little bit of yellow in there, because I want it to be dark, light, dark, with, you know, transitions in between. So if you gotta kind of like blend these areas where they meet so they transition smoothly, you can. Okay. Now, before we move on to the belly, I'm gonna do another run on my feathers. So we're really like building this up using layers. This is also called glazing, when you're doing layers on thin layers on top of thin layers. And now I'm going to be using even more paint and really like relying on the opaqueness of gouache and not relying on water so much. So I mix a little bit of my turquoise blue yellow in with my blue to make a turquoise blue. I'm just doing another layer.
For a second, my eyes unfocused, but they were looking directly at the bird, and I thought you were holding the bird. I was so confused. I was like, what?
I'm like, here, little fella.
Yeah, hey. Yeah. Comforting. Kingfisher birds can dive up to 25 miles per hour.
Whoa. That's cool. Now you'll notice here that I'm kind of avoiding where these feathers are layered, where they're meeting. See how I'm just leaving that little line in between there? I'm gonna go and put in a darker color there to communicate shadow. I'm just leaving those lines there as a reminder so they don't get lost, okay? So that's why I'm kind of doing this in chunks as well, to remind myself, okay, I have some highlights and some shadows to put in. I don't want to lose the overall shape of these like layers of feathers. So I'm kind of just going to keep painting in these shapes. So then when I go in to put in my shadows and highlights, I know where to put them. Okay, we're going to move on back to the chest, the neck, and the cheek. We're going to really put in our yellow and red areas. So I have my yellow handy. I'm going to mix it in with a little bit of carmine to make an orange. Now, even on this belly, I want there to be a color transition. You can see on the edge here, it's mostly yellow, and then it transitions closer to an orange. And then I even have a little bit of a shadow by the orange where it's a dark orange. So that's what I'm going for here. So I'm going to start with yellow. And again, I'm going to be using mostly paint. I'm not relying on water too much at this point. I'm going to put in my yellow. Okay. Go around the eye.
They can also dive up to 2 feet into the water.
Wow.
So 25 miles per hour straight into the water to get a fish 2 feet down.
That is so cool.
That's insane.
Okay, so now I mix in a little bit of carmine with this yellow, and I'm starting to do a little bit of orange. So hopefully at this point you can kind of feel a little bit of form. That orange should hopefully create a little bit of distance so we can tell that those feathers are on top of the yellow part. That's the whole point of creating value, is to push something back. I'm going to do one more run, 1 or 2, where I'm going to pick up a little bit of red and maybe borrow some of that brown that I used from the for the stick. And right where these feathers are meeting this orange, there would be a darker value there. If you need to use your round 2 for this area, please feel free, my friends. And then, using just a damp brush, I'm going to just blend that red out a little bit into that orange.
It's like a lovely golden color.
Yeah, isn't that pretty? Look at that. Nice and smooth blending. And again, this is your painting. I love just doing like swoops of strong color in some places. So if you need to go back in with some yellow and really like define some yellow, you can. And we're going to do the same thing kind of behind this eye here, where it's going to start yellow. And if you feel like your yellow is missing a highlight, you can take your yellow and a little bit of white and create a light yellow. And then kind of right here on this chest where it's sticking out the most, put in a little bit of that highlight.
I like that.
You don't
highlights.
Yeah. You don't have to go too crazy, because I really love this yellow color. I don't want to lose it. But sometimes just doing a little swoop of white somewhere can really make it pop. So I'm going to do this really light yellow behind the eye. Okay. I'm going to switch to my 2 since I'm working in a smaller area. I'm going to grab more of that yellow. Then I'm going to switch it to orange, or more of an orange. And then finish it up with some red, maybe reddish brown. Do you feel it starting to pop, my friend?
It's got such good blending.
And this is kind of why I wanted to introduce you guys to gouache, because it's just, you can layer like this, you can get the watercolor effect, you can get the strong vibrancy, you can also blend it easier than acrylic. You know, it really is fun. And I just saw a question, and I know it's the end of the month, so you probably would have had this answered already, but you can mix gouache with watercolors. You can also mix gouache with acrylic. You can do whatever you want when it comes to art, but I have absolutely done paintings before where I mixed the gouache with the watercolor and they turned out great. I don't do too many acrylic paintings, so I haven't tried it with acrylic, but as long as you don't try to like reconstitute it a lot, I don't see what the problem would be if you were to mix gouache with acrylic.
What if you had a secret message and part of your painting was acrylic and the part that your secret message was gouache? And if you ever wanted to pass the secret message, you said, go wash my painting.
Just go wash this painting, boom, it will appear.
Boom.
Keenan, I love the way you think.
Thank you.
Okay, and I feel like I need to just create more shadow depth between these blue layers and my yellow, so I'm gonna do a darker value red and just do one more run. And it's not across the whole thing. Notice I'm just kind of doing it where these feathers go in, like in between each other. There we go. Doesn't that just make it pop a little bit more?
Yep.
So nice. Okay. And I'm just going to layer this red on top of this blue because I can, and it will show up. Sorry. Okay. So now we're moving on to step 6. We're going to start putting in the shadows and the no, I skipped a step, you guys.
Oh, no.
But that's okay.
Perfect.
I just haven't done the beak and the eyes yet. I'm going to do the beak and the eyes right now.
Oh, that's easy.
Yeah.
No problem. We can layer.
Also, I just want to say, for a majority of paintings, you can do different steps at different times. And there's definitely more than one way to approach a painting than the one way that I'm showing you. So feel free to, like, if you're like, yeah, I can see you approaching it that way, but really I want to try it this way, try it. I don't think any one way is better. Okay.
Thank you.
Well, Keenan, you're welcome. Okay, so I'm going to grab black. Even on the beak itself, there's going to be value changes. So you can see here that on the bottom part of my beak, it's mostly black. And the top part, it kind of has a blue hint to it and a highlight right here, because beaks are shiny. And so that light is hitting it, and when light hits shiny things, it makes lighter, well, when light hits anything, it makes a lighter value. But when, especially if it's like shiny or wet, it will really make a lot lighter value. So that's actually mostly gray on the top beak.
Really?
Yeah, if you were to just take like this color out, that's gray, my friend.
What?
Yeah, but it looks black because our brains are amazing. And it's just like, oh, a beak. Beaks are black.
Or
that's a black beak.
Maybe our brains secretly aren't that smart. They're like, no, that's black. They just can't. They can also be convinced otherwise.
Okay, so I have my 6. If you want to use your 2, you can. And I'm just going to put the mouth line in. And then that very bottom part of that beak is just black. And then as it makes its way to the body, on the bottom half of the beak, it gets a little bit gray. So I'm going to add a little bit of white to this mixture. Okay. And then using that same gray, I'm going to start off the top of my beak, like so. And now I'm going to switch to my 2. So I have this gray color, and actually if you look at black, sometimes highlighted blacks have blue in them, or purple sometimes. So I'm going to introduce a little bit of blue into this gray. And I need a little bit more water to make it easier to move. There we go. So I'm doing kind of a blue-gray chunk here. The tip is going to get darker. So I'm just going to pick up a little bit more gray and black here. Okay. And then I'm going to use light gray for the top of the beak where it meets the body. So right here. And if you want to mix in white, you can. If you want to just kind of utilize water similar to how we do in watercolor, you can. I'm utilizing water right now. Now beaks are kind of funny because the lines have to be pretty straight because it can change the shape of the beak pretty quickly. And also, I kind of feel like there's a dark outline on the top of my beak right here. Can you see that?
A dark outline?
Like an outline, like an edge, like a...
Yeah, kind of.
I feel like that's flattening the shape of my beak a little bit. So I'm going to go in with a light gray and try and like get rid of that hard outline and make it feel like it matches the colors around it. I'm going to do white a little bit here. And then as this beak gets close to the eye, it goes dark again. So I'm using this light gray and I'm going back to mostly black here. And I know that seems like a lot of detail for such a small little area, but sometimes it's just those hints of value changes that really elevate your work. So, you know, a little bit of patience is required, but don't get frustrated. And if you're to a place where you're just like, you know what, I don't really care about form, I just want people to know it's a bird, that's fine. That's okay. Everyone starts somewhere, and that is the first step.
I would be pretty happy if someone could guess that I drew a bird.
Right?
Yeah. What kind of posture do you think kingfishers have?
Posture?
Uh-huh.
I don't know. They seem very
Do you
regal.
think they sit up straight at all, or
Totally.
keep their head on the camera?
Okay. Okay. I feel pretty good about that beak. Oh my gosh, Keenan, you were telling me to move my head. You son of a gun. That took me like 5 minutes to get it. I was so into painting this bird. Oh, you got me.
Classic.
You got me good. Okay. I'm sorry I didn't understand what you were saying.
It's okay.
Okay.
I noticed that.
So now I'm going to go to the eyeball, And this is a lot more straightforward. It's pretty much inky black all the way around except for the areas that we left white in our outline. So I'm just using black. I mixed a tiny bit of water in there so it was easy for me to move this paint around. But I want this to be pretty opaque. I want it to be pretty dark. Now there is a little bit of an eyelid, so I'm just gonna kind of go follow that shape of the eye on the outside of it. And then that top glare and the bottom glare is so white that it could be distracting. So I'm gonna just take a little bit of gray, and instead of leaving it white of the paper, I'm gonna introduce some gray into there to tone it down just a little bit. Now the wonderful thing about this is don't get too afraid of like covering your highlight because you have white paint, so you can just put it back in. And I feel like it needs to be a little bit rounder at the top, so I'm just gonna kind of round this up a bit more. There. Okay. It's not time to judge your painting yet. Don't give up on it yet, okay? We're still doing all the things. Okay, so now we're gonna go into we're gonna leave that be, and we're gonna go into our feathers and start putting in shadows and highlights. So, mixing my turquoise with a little bit of black to create a dark blue. Where these feathers, like right under these feathers, layers of feathers, there's going to be shadow because we want to communicate that one is on top of the other, and how we do that is by darker values. So this is me introducing darker values to the conversation. And by conversation, I mean painting. I could have just said painting. And then I put in that darker values, and I'm just going to blend out. Okay.
This bird is going to need a name.
Yeah, Keenan, you think of that name.
I've got one.
Oh, you do already?
Yeah, I'm ready.
What is it?
Jason.
Jason. That's a good one.
Yeah.
So I'm just kind of following the shapes of these feathers and putting in the shadows. And already they should kind of feel like they're popping a little bit. Not yet, because we still like have highlights and stuff to put in, but a little bit. You know what I mean? Just a little bit of depth and dimension. And of course, if you put a shadow in, you blend it out too much that you lose it, you can always put it back in. I'm just putting like a darker blue at the top here. And if you feel like the shadow blended out is kind of too gray and you feel like you lost your blue, you can do another layer right on top of this. This is why we like gouache, my friends. Like, don't get discouraged, because we can always just do something else right on top. And this is also the place, like, as I'm doing these shadow layers, if I want like a really strong hint of just blue, I can put that in. Like kind of play with that. Play with the turquoise, play with the blue. I'm leaving like this area, I'm gonna leave this light blue because I feel like it brings dimension to it. So just because you're introducing a new color doesn't mean you have to do an even wash of that whole color across the entire thing. You can let some areas just be like this strong blue or that turquoise or that, you know, light wash that we initially laid down. And I just want to say, I know this eye is looking different from this, and I want to point out why. There is a very strong highlight or white mark above this eye instead of this eye. So it's making this eye feel bigger, and this feels more narrow. When we paint the top of that eyeball, this white area, that will go away, okay? So I just realized that that could be making you feel like your painting looks bad. We just haven't done that part yet. So I'm kind of just doing blue, turquoisey marks on this. Okay, and this is also where you can add your highlights. So I put in my shadows. I'm going to mix some white into my gouache to get a nice light blue. And I can be like, okay, we have some feather textures on top here. And you can use white paint for those to show up. You see? And I'm really allowing my brush to be a little bit dry so I can get those kind of feathery feels.
I love those highlights.
Feathery feels.
Feathery feels.
It's a thing. Look it up.
Look it up.
This needs a highlight here. This needs a highlight here.
What if we had our own LMA dictionary?
Yes.
Or description words, phrases?
If your highlights are getting a little too wide, you can switch to your 2. But just know that usually whenever you have a shadow, you should think of things always in at least 3 values. There needs to be a mid value, a light value, and a dark value. So my mid values are my blues, and hopefully there's variation within those. And then my dark, like my blacks that I mix with my blue, those are my darker values, those are my shadows. And now I need a highlight. So that's where we introduce white, that's where we mix white with blue paint to get a light blue. And by having those 3, you should start having things that pop now. It should start to kind of pop out a little bit as long as you have at least those 3. If you have more, that's great. We really value variation is key when creating forms. So if you have more, that's awesome. If where you're at is, you know what, I got my medium, I got my lights and my darks, that's great too. So I'm going to be doing a little bit of texture lines with this brush. Okay, I'm going to leave that alone for a second, and I'm going to go to this blue area right underneath this yellow part. I'm going to introduce a dark blue where it meets the beak. Like so. And then I'm going to introduce a little bit of white to that mix to make a lighter value. And then it's going to go dark again, similar to our head. And I'm using my 2 for this. Okay, and now I need to do more of a value transition on the head of my bird. So I'm taking black, mixing it with blue, and where that head is meeting the beak, I'm doing a dark blue, and then on top of this yellow part, and then it needs to go on top of the eye as well. I'm going to mix a light blue into the mix now. Put that on top. and a dark at the bottom here. So remember to really utilize your black and your white paint when you're doing these different variations here. Okay, and right behind the eye, that blue is going to be a dark blue because the socket of the eyeball would be kind of creating this shadow in here. Okay, now we're kind of to the last steps. We've really, your bird should feel like it has form now, and now we're kind of just going in and doing feather textures. We got to do some feather textures on the top of the head. We also have to paint the foot. There's a foot in there, we forgot to paint it.
Oh.
So this foot, we're only seeing a little bit of it. It's kind of turned away from us. I'm just trying to make sure that it's a different color from the yellow that it's sticking out from and the brown that it's sitting on. So I'm doing like an orange. So that's really my goal here. I just want to make sure it feels different from the wood that it's sitting on and the yellow that it's coming out from. Not a lot of detail, kind of just putting it there. All right, now we're going into more details. Now this is the fun part, I think, just those really nice finishing touches to really kind of define this. So I'm going to go back into our wood and grab this dark brown, and using my two, I'm going to kind of just do these thin. You know how wood kind of has like grain?
100% I know how wood has grain.
So that's a little bit what I'm doing here. It also kind of has like a little bit of cracks.
Yes.
So that's what I'm introducing into here. Just some different value lines to kind of give the feel of actual
timber.
And if it gets too dark, I put that down as too dark. That's okay, just blend it out. But just even those little details right there, isn't that just a nice...
It adds so much to it.
It's just a nice little touch. It's not too much that you have to do. It just gives enough information that our viewer knows what's going on. And it's going to be the same thing kind of over here. Okay, ooh, that feels good. Now, on the top of my bird, they kind of have this like patterning where there's like little chunks of feathers. So I'm going to mix a dark blue. And on this dark blue, it's going to go like little hash marks like that. Now we don't want it too dark that it feels like it's popping off of the bird. So we're going for a dark blue here, but not like black blue. That might have been too dark. There we go, that feels better. Chunk.
He's got nice waves.
Yeah, just little waves. And then as we get to the back, we just want to make sure that it shows up on this blue. So if you have to darken your color just a little bit so it shows up on this true blue instead of this light blue, go for it. Okay, there's also those kind of same little marks under here. So I'm going to introduce those. Okay. And I'm just kind of blending out. I feel like there's a lot of white space around my eye. And I'm just kind of going to blend that out a little bit. And it doesn't scare me because I have white paint. So if I blend out too much that I lose my highlight, I can just go back in there and put it back in. I'm gonna do another layer of black just to make it feel nice and dark, because I think when I added that gray, it softened the darkness around it. There we go, that feels better. Ooh, and there's a little bit of yellow that's supposed to be right underneath this bird here. Red, there we go. And if you want to put in a few like texture lines on your bird, I know we kind of put in our highlights and our shadows. If you feel like you need to do more, you know what's best for your painting. So I feel like I need just a few marks here. A few little highlights. Or maybe if you feel like you need to redefine some shadows, you're allowed to look at your painting and decide what it needs. I know that's scary, but you guys can do it.
Jason looks friendly.
He's looking good. I'm just doing strong, just pure turquoise blue marks here. I like it. I feel like it needs it in some of these areas. So that's what I'm doing. And what I might do, since this is so white here, so I'm just gonna blend a little bit. So it's a light value because this is a white section on the bird, but I don't want it to like be so white that that's what's popping out and coming at us. I'm trying to tone it back a little bit by just blending out around it. And that's a little trick I do sometimes, is just to make something white push down a little bit, is just blend it. I'm telling you, this bird you can just go forever on, you know?
Yeah, get new highlights and new shadows.
Yeah, like, ooh. Okay, I'm gonna do one more, just black part on this beak. Make sure that mouth line is nice and dark, kind of where this is meeting the eye. It's gonna be dark. Make sure there's a little bit of a shadow right there. And where it's meeting the feathers. There we go. That feels good. Okay, I think we did it, you guys. We did our Kingfisher bird. And again, maybe you put this away and then you come back to it tomorrow and you're like, oh, I noticed that I'm missing a little bit of a white highlight on the top of this head. Well, guess what? I'm gonna take my white paint. Well, that had too much water. You wanna make sure you're using mostly paint. There we go. Putting in a little bit of a highlight too. You see? You just keep on going. But I suggest taking a break from it for a minute to make sure that it's actually what it needs and you're not, you know, kind of stress painting is what I call it. So, you guys, thank you so much for painting with me. I can't wait to see how this turns out. This was a hard project, a lot of layers, a lot of details, but you guys can do it. And maybe the worst thing that happens is you finish it and you're like, I don't really like it. Well, guess what? It's a piece of paper, you throw it in the trash. Nobody has to know. And you can try it again later, or maybe you're like, maybe I just don't like painting birds. That's fair. I don't like painting some things, you know what I mean? Like, you're allowed to have those things, you guys. So anyways, I hope you learned something. I hope you had fun with gouache. I hope it gave you the freedom to try things that maybe you wouldn't have tried with watercolor. If you're on Instagram, you can tag us at Let's Go Make Art or hashtag Let's Make Art. We also have a Facebook group called Let's Make Art Watercolor that you can join just so you guys can share with each other what you're making. So a lot of fun. Thank you guys for painting with me. Keenan, you did awesome.
Thank you.
And I'll see you guys next week. Bye.